Welcome. Welcome to the first of the fall 2004 Skirball tapes. As you'll remember, our theme is the radical imagination. Today, I'm Catherine Stimson, your host, and our guest is Anthony W. Marx, Tony Marx, the extraordinary president of a historic institution, the New York Public Library. He exercises a radical imagination about what institutions of learning can be and what they should be, how they can serve. A key word in Tony's vocabulary. Now, here's our process. Tony and I will talk for 45 minutes or so. Then your questions. Please put your questions in the Q&A at the bottom of your screen, and we will choose among them. And these questions that we choose will be in the chat column on your screen. And again, I am so happy we're beginning our fall season with Tony Marx. Tony, in 2011, it seems like yesterday, you became the president and CEO of the New York Public Library. 92 locations, including 4 major research centers, including the Schomburg Center, 54 million items, and a $1 billion endowment, a great dynamic center of learning. But what I'd like to do is to start with your life of learning. How did you learn? How did you change? How did you educate yourself?
Well, first, it's wonderful.
Now, but before first, I would like to look at this slide, and I would like to dwell on this slide for a moment, because you were born in Inwood in the Upper Manhattan in 1959. Your parents were German Jewish refugees from the Holocaust. What was this building or its predecessor, and what did it mean to you?
Well, first, it's an honor to be here. It's always a pleasure to be with you, Kate. You are just extraordinary and done such amazing work that's inspired so many of us. So hats off to you, and thank you for having me here.
It's a great pleasure.
I do need to correct. When I started, the endowment at the library was $1 billion. We're at $1.7 billion, so we're doing well.
All right, okay. I'm changing my notes.
So I grew up in Inwood, which has always been a neighborhood of immigrants. When I was growing up, it was Jewish and Irish Catholic. It's now largely Dominican, so the waves change, but the story remains. It is the story of New York. It's not a fancy neighborhood, and my dad didn't go to college. I went to public schools, PS 98, right near the library, and eventually lucky enough to get to Bronx Science, which set me off in various ways. But the original library, which is not the one you pictured, was a beautiful old, I think, 50-year-old building that had just way outlived its best days and was badly designed, and we knew it needed serious help. And one of the things that we focused on, but only one of them in my time here at the library, is capital improvements, or to be more precise, we've spent $1 billion on our branches, mostly in the poorest neighborhoods, which the system had largely ignored and the city had largely ignored for the better part of the century that they've been around. And I was never comfortable with that. I have an amazing partner, a chief operating officer, Iris Weinschel, who's had amazing jobs in New York, commissioner of transportation, vice chancellor of CUNY. She's a powerhouse. She can't be stopped, which is why she's my chief operating officer. She also happens to be Chuck Schumer's wife. And, so we saw an opportunity because of Iris and her strength to get, a major set of improvements done and to make a statement in the poorer neighborhoods of New York that everyone should have a beautiful and inspiring library, not just those who are lucky enough to come to this, the palace of research on 42nd and 5th. And you can see from my office, it is a palace in every way. So the Inwood branch, we talked about renovating it and it just didn't make sense. So a little heartbreaking, I concluded that we were going to have to replace it, even though it was where I went as a kid, where my mom dumped me while she was trying to do shopping and didn't want to be bothered. I would sneak across the street to the pet store from time to time. I'll just
The
admit,
pet store? Why to the pet store?
because I love animals and they didn't, my parents weren't so keen on my having so many pets at home. So I went to visit them at the pet store. But mostly I was at the library and in fact, I'll tell the story that when the library came a calling, I was at Amherst before this, and asked if I would be interested in being president. The first thing I did was I went back to my neighborhood library, to Inwood, and I walked around and I talked to people. Okay, hopefully I didn't freak anybody out, but I behaved myself. And it was life-changing. Just that first visit, I talked to a school teacher who was looking at books tragically 3 grade levels below her grade to see what would work for her students. Somebody else who was running a business out of the library. Someone else who was there just to use, the internet and get air conditioning because it was summer. But the one that blew me away was a Dominican guy, not great English. My Spanish is not perfect, but passable. And I asked him what he was doing, and he explained that he lived in a 2-room apartment with 8 other people. There was no quiet, no place to do anything reflective, and that he came for lunch every day to the library. And then he sort of sheepishly explained that he couldn't read. And I said, I think we teach literacy classes here at the library, which indeed we do. But he came to the library anyway, and I said, tell me what you're doing here. And he brought me over to a table where he had one of those huge picture books that, my parents had of, reproductions of the masterpieces of the Renaissance.
Oh,
And he said, I come to the library at lunch every day to look at angels. And then he pointed to the painting he was looking at, which was of an angel. And I just thought, oh my God, I have to do this job. It's unbelievable.
of course, you've
Everyone's
always
coming here. Anyway, I'm not trying to
go back.
question.
The boy, the little Barks boy. What are you doing in the Inwood Library? Because I know the branch libraries.
I'm reading.
So
I'm just
deep.
reading and browsing because everything is there. It's like for a kid in a library, it's like a candy store. I mean, you can read anything, you can find anything, you can stumble upon anything, which is why in person makes such a difference still. And nobody's sort of telling you, no, you have to do this, you can't do that. You can follow your interests, which for a kid is sort of a new experience. Yeah. And to answer your question, for my own education, it really, Bronx Science was amazing, but it was a bit of a test mill, to be honest. It's just huge and everyone was focused on that. It was when I got to college, I started at Wesleyan and suddenly had faculty who were interested in whether I knew how to think and write, which I didn't really. And they taught me, and that was life-changing. South Africa we'll talk about as another life-changing experience. I want to answer your question about the Inwood branch. So we say, okay, we need a new branch here as part of, $1 billion of, working our way through 2 million square feet of amazing real estate. Again, the most visited, most trusted civic institution in town because we're in every neighborhood, many neighborhoods that don't have anything else to offer people. And we've been there for, 5 or 6 generations, always respecting people, never asking for papers, always welcoming the immigrants, as we did in Inwood, as I was the child of. But we knew we needed a new one. So I said, okay, let's figure out if we could do something different. And I love asking questions about whether we can do things better or different. And the question in this instance, I said, is what about the air above the library? Because I'd seen the branches and we'd never done anything. And I was like, this is New York. That's valuable as well. It took us close to a decade to get this done. It was not easy. We had lots of folks who object, who now think it was the most brilliant thing and that they all say they
objected to what? Objected to you selling.
What we did was we said, let's redevelop the site. Let's get a bigger, grander, better library, which it is. You saw the double height windows onto Broadway. It's an amazing branch. Go use it, go visit it. I love it. There's a community center and a senior center next to it. But more importantly, there's a tower above it that has 175 units of 100% affordable housing. And that simply, we wouldn't have used that space if we hadn't gotten creative. And now we've said to the city, we've got lots of branches like this that are sort of one story, sort of next to bodegas in the Bronx. Let's build affordable, let us be a part of the solution. We worked with Robin Hood, we worked with the Rosenblatt family as donors, we worked with the city, with EDC, and we got it done. And now we hope we can make that a model, because New York needs to be creative to not just solve one problem, libraries, getting them better, improving them, bringing them into the modern age, but why can't we help solve the affordable housing crisis as well?
I think it's brilliant. It's brilliant. But Tony, every year I get a letter from the New York Public Library saying the city is about to cut our budget. And I sign a letter to the city.
Bless you, Kate.
Saying this is indispensable. Now, I have two questions. One is,
I have so many.
Why does the city do this to you? And because it's so self-evident, the services that you provide. And the second, I want to put a picture on the screen and see if you recognize this gentleman, because it has to do with financing your brilliant work.
All right.
Surely you recognize.
Hello, Andrew Carnegie. All right, I'll do this in historic order rather than in the order you asked. So the New York Public Library was originally established by the richest man in New York then, Astor, the greatest collector in New York, Mr. Lennox, and the most powerful politician in New York, Mr. Tilden, who by rights should have been president of the United States. But
we won't
stolen from him. And at the beginning of Jim Crow, it's not a good story. So they created the Astor, Lennox, and Tilden Trust, which I happen to be the president of, to create a public research library. That not only did not exist in the world, it's still pretty unique.
But Tony, isn't the word free in there as well?
Well, everything, they created it as a private institution to do research library, but the intention was anyone could use it for free, which is why, we're different than the Library of Congress, because that's mostly for Congress and just not a lot of users. Amazing collection, amazing colleagues there. But, or Harvard or even NYU, which are for the Harvard or NYU communities. We are the research library for anyone, and we are the most used research library on the planet, because people come to New York for this purpose, and we invite them to come for this purpose. Carnegie came along about, I think, 5 or 10 years after the founding of the New York Public as a research library. Carnegie, who was by then the richest man in New York, if not the world, he had grown up poor in Scotland. He had used libraries. They were essential for him. In fact, as a kid, he fought to make his local library free because they started charging fees, and he became a rabble-rouser. I know that may be hard to imagine given what else we know about Andrew Carnegie, but he believed in libraries as a fundamental right and as the way to ensure that everyone has an opportunity to learn and to advance themselves. It's a powerful vision. It's tied to the Enlightenment. It's tied to democracy. And it's, core to our civilization and our democracy at this point. Carnegie said, I will give the largest gift in the history of philanthropy, and indeed it still is in today's dollars.
5.2 million, right?
I mean, it was like 5 million then, but it's, astronomical
right.
now if you inflate. David Nassau is a better expert at this than I am. But and what he said was, I will build branches in every neighborhood. And in fact, we call them the Carnegies. They are the limestone mansions, the really amazing ones. And he said, I will pay to build those. The city has to provide the land, and the city has to commit to paying the operating costs, but I don't trust the city to operate it. I'm going to give it to this private foundation, the Astor, Lennox, and Tilden Trust, which run the New York Public Library. Very complicated. It means the library gets a little over half of its funding from the city of New York and return on a $1.7 billion endowment. And I and my colleagues have to raise between 80 and $100 million a year, which is not straightforward.
Tony, it is not easy to finance a radical imagination.
Well, but the truth is, if people are inspired by what we do, and they are, we've broken all records of private fundraising. It's not easy because I can't help you get your kid into college. I can't help you if your elbow is broken. There are all kinds of other things you can be a trustee or donor to that will sort of help you in other ways. That, for me, it's just purely what good can we do for society? What do we believe in? And people step up. The governance model, which creates a private board that gets more than half its funding from the city, is a complicated one. I shouldn't say this, but I joke. There was a moment early on when things were a little touchy around a particular bad renovation plan that in the end I had to kill. But I thought to myself, surely thanks to Mr. Carnegie, I'm the only person in this town who has to please Steve Schwartzman and Bill de Blasio at the same time. That's the governance model. And there were moments when I thought that's crazy, but I have come to believe that the countervailing forces implied in that are actually hugely helpful and productive. And when it works, the private and the public stir each other on to greater possibilities. Your question about the cuts, every year, it seems, we have faced huge cuts. This last year, we faced mind-boggling set of cuts as the mayor thought asylum seekers and the end of pandemic funding for things and lost revenue was going to create a huge hole. It turned out the hole was not nearly so huge, but he threatened us with cuts that were unthinkable. And in fact, we had to close on Sundays, which is also unthinkable. And, we go to, we have direct access to millions of New Yorkers who use us. There are millions who don't necessarily use us, but who love us and love the idea of us. They immediately respond. And, City Hall and City Council are awash with letters and citizens saying, no, this is really important. We're a tiny piece of the budget. And yet, we get faced with these cuts. We have managed to resist every round of cut. This year, we got full restoration baseline. Why this happens, I have a PhD in political science. It makes no sense to me whatsoever because we end up, the mayor proposes cuts, even though the mayor loves libraries, and even though we're tiny. In the end, the cuts are all restored because New Yorkers demand that, which is a powerful statement about democracy still working. And we've just lost momentum, and the staff has lost morale, and we've had to wait on hiring. Go back to the Carnegies. We got $100 million from the city, and then we found another 60 as costs went up. We chose 5 Carnegies in the poorest neighborhoods of New York, did a complete renovation. And with the budget cuts, we thought we're not even going to be able to open these in the neighborhoods where they are most needed. We are now opening them. But, it all ties together. Exactly why we go through the budget dance the way we do is sort of a mystery to me. And, it shouldn't be at this point. And it's clearly unnecessary and counterproductive, right?
Well, I will keep writing my letter until common sense comes.
Bless you.
Let me go back because I'm so interested in the life of learning that you have gone through and that is behind, that helped to inspire you. So there you are, public school kid. Bronx school, you go to Wesleyan, you go to Yale, you graduate in 1981, I believe. And then South Africa.
What happened?
Of your three major books, award-winning books, 2 are wholly or partially about South Africa. You go there and you not only do your research, but you become involved with the anti-apartheid struggle and with a school called Kenya. Am I pronouncing it correctly?
Kanya.
Kenya. And isn't that the Zulu word for shine?
It's a word in many African languages with all lovely meanings, varied meanings. And we chose it in part for that reason. And the banyan tree is also a sign of education. Look, when I got to college, South Africa was the hot topic on campus. I knew nothing about it. It was just after the uprising of 1976. I was captivated by the odd arguments. I got involved in the
What do you
divestment.
mean by the odd arguments?
No, sorry, I misspoke. By the arguments, by the sort of the passion of the students, by the sense of righteousness, even though the truth is we didn't know a whole lot of specifics or details, but we knew enough to say this is wrong. Apartheid is deeply wrong. And the people of South Africa are fighting for their lives against it, and we need to support them in whatever way we can. And I found that very compelling. I still do. Even though I'd never been to South Africa, I had no connections to it whatsoever. So I worked on divestment in South Africa through college, both at Wesleyan and at Yale. Wesleyan, where we did get the college to divest. And then I had a job an important job to me in Philadelphia, working for the University of Pennsylvania president for a couple of years. But then I thought, I'm young. It's time for an adventure. I've never been to this country. This is the time to go. And luckily I had a friend and mentor who was a vice president at the Ford Foundation, a predecessor of our mutual friend, Allison Bernstein, who also later was vice president there. And he put me in touch with the leading education NGO in the country. Of course, they were all ANC, even though no one could talk about it. That was against the law. When I showed up in 1984,
this is the South African Committee?
The South African Committee on Higher Education, SACID. And they were the leading NGO by far nationally. And he said, I can't pay you because you're a white American. That would be crazy. And I can't pay you to come over because I need all the money to do the work we're doing in South Africa. I said, fine, I'll pay my way. If you can help me find a place to live, that'd be great. And I'll do whatever you want. And he found me, this is a guy who became a dear friend and mentor and later deputy minister of education and president of the Mandela Foundation. And he said, he put me living illegally with Black students near the University of Witwatersrand in a house that was famous or infamous for people on the run, hiding there, and all these political, people who were doing amazing work running through the house. And when I got to the office, he said, look, we'd love for you to do some teaching. That's great. We'd love for you to do some regular stuff. But we have this idea that nobody has the time to pursue. And the idea was pretty straightforward. It was the great white universities, the liberal English universities, were all saying, we'd love to have Black students, whether you believe it or not, we can argue about. But then they said, apartheid has made sure that no one is qualified to get in here because apartheid was purposefully undereducating or uneducating the majority of people. So we thought, well, let's put this to the test. Let's create a college that enrolls students after apartheid education for 1 year of high quality residential education, something that looked like Wesleyan or Amherst or Yale or what have you, with great teachers. And let's give them liberal arts classes. Let's use Indiana University's distance learning certification, which just, I'd never been to Indiana and still haven't, but was the best and biggest in the world, to certify that these were college level courses. So no one could dispute that.
You're great at putting things together.
And basically I spent that year talking to everyone in the country about what this college should look like. That meant, the most bizarre conversations with the history professors educated at Oxford who couldn't believe that I was suggesting that African history could be a foundational history course. They say it has to be Europe. I'm like, I don't even understand what you're talking about. And lots of those debates, convincing the universities to take a risk, to take these credits, and then finding people who would run the college and finding the first group of students and finding the residences. And my favorite moment was hand sanding the floor of the residence. It's all about manual labor. I don't get to do that enough. The and here's what happened. Over the course of the next decade, thanks to funding from the Ford Foundation, Swedish, Scandinavian governments, et cetera, this college enrolled 100 students a year, half in Johannesburg and half in Cape Town. And 1 year of quality, respectful education undid all the purposeful damage of 12 plus years of apartheid. They went on to the great universities and to great careers. For me, it was a life-changing experience for two reasons. One, it gave me an excuse to meet everyone in the country, not just for research or for my own interest, but so that I could help put something together. And it made all the difference in the world. And I was like the only American in the country at this point. And during the next 3 years, the country was.
Didn't you have trouble getting in and out? Weren't you?
Oh my God, yes. Oh my God, yes. I can tell that
Didn't
story.
they know here comes that Tony Marx denied?
But anyway, the other lesson, which was life-changing, was the power of education, the power of the human mind, even when it has been purposefully held back, if not, worse, stunted by apartheid education, that it can repair and find paths to lead to great outcomes. And I thought, this stuff is the most powerful thing I've ever seen, and I will spend my life figuring out how to spread this lesson. And you can imagine it also meant, it was the hottest place on the planet politically. People were literally, dying. People were, fleeing for their lives. We were hiding people. People were banned. It was crazy. And I ate it up. It was the most alive moment of my life, I think, and changed my life. And everything I did as a scholar at Columbia and writer after, at Amherst or here at the library, has basically followed that lesson. And yes, to answer your question, the first time I went on a tourist visa, because why not? I think the second time, I went like 3 or 4 times for, call it close to a year each time. And second time I met, even though they knew me, because, the security branch had dragged me in and interrogated me. And, I worked for a known organization that got raided all the time and lived in a house that was, very suspicious to the authorities. I managed to get a tourist visa the second time. The third time, I was ready to do my research for my first book, trying to understand the debates within Black politics, which as a student arguing for divestment, I've been completely oblivious to, obviously, always more complicated. Debates similar to the US debates of Black nationalism versus civil rights versus class-based analysis. There are some of the similar debates, even though lots of huge differences. And so the third time I applied for a tourist visa, and they said, "Oh no, we know who you are. No, that's not happening." Then I went to the president of Princeton, who knew me because I'd harangued him on South African investments.
And you're getting your PhD there too, weren't
and
you?
Got my PhD there. He said, "I got you." Next thing I knew, John Whitehead, the Deputy Secretary of State of the United States, was calling me in my dorm room. He says, "Don't worry, we've got you covered. Apply for a real visa." I apply for a real visa. I get rejected. I call that consulate or embassy and say, "What happened?" And they said, "Well, if you didn't think you rang alarm bells just from you, having the Deputy Secretary of State of the United States call on your behalf definitely rang alarm bells." At which point this was one of my low moments. I thought, oh my God, I'm never going to get back into this country that I loved, that I thought about spending the rest of my life in. I totally was into it. And I thought, okay, I have to do, plan B, which I was not in favor of, which is, looking at the exile movements. I shouldn't tell this story because I don't want to encourage people to be as crazy as I once was. But I arranged to go to Tanzania first. In order to get to Tanzania from New York, you had to fly into Johannesburg. I get to Johannesburg on a Friday at 3. I'm in the city that I have loved, where filled with people I love and care and who are, ready to give their lives for their ideals in a way that I'd never seen before. And I thought, this is going to drive me crazy. So I go up to the immigration counter and I say, I play every card you can imagine a white boy and, facing an Afrikaans official would play, and say, Oh my God, I have to go to Tanzania. I hear it's a dump. You know, I hear the Carlton Hotel in Joburg is the best in town. Again, playing on every
Shameless to shame.
shamelessly every card. And the woman looks at me and she says, "Well, it's after 3 on a Friday, so Pretoria is closed. Pretoria, which is the capital where they check your politics." She says, "I'll give you a visa for the weekend." She stamps me in. I spent a year doing research on that visa because once you're in the country, they assume you've been checked politically. And here's the scary part. As I'm walking past her and I'm walking by the guards who's going to open my bags and look if he so chooses, I realize one of my bags is filled with ANC literature that I had not yet finished reading, that at the time had a 6-year mandatory jail sentence for possession. And I just thought, oh boy, here we go. And I just walked and they didn't stop me. And, you know, who knows what would have happened if they had. I'm not advertising it, but it's a moment when you're 20, in your mid 20s, you do things that, you know, your parents shouldn't hear about.
Given the fact that both your parents are dead, I think they will probably be quite proud of you. But can I go? There was a name you mentioned, a leading educator. And would that have been Neville Alexander?
Well, the person I was referring to was John Samuel, who was the head nationally and became very important in the Mandela government and the Mandela Foundation. His partner was the head of the Cape Town office, Neville Alexander, two, you know, Black South African, 2 PhDs, the most incredibly brilliant, you know, eloquent man you've ever met. He was South Africa's leading Trotskyite, so he disagreed with the ANC. He ends up on Robben Island for like 15 years in the jail cell next to Nelson Mandela.
Tony, tell us a little about what's called, because these men must have told you about it, the University of Robben Island.
Right. I mean, Robben Island was an opportunity for them to talk to each other, to not be on the run. They would try to get readings. That was not always easy. They tried to communicate with the world. You know, they had to make friends with guards, etc. But it was a formative place that helped to produce the governments that would come because, you know, unlike everybody on the ground in the country or even the exiles, they were sort of forced to sit in place, which is part of what a university does. It gives you the opportunity to sit and think and reflect and talk and argue. And, you know, and Robben Island was amazing. But anyway, Neville was ridiculous. I mean, he was just off the charts. And he loved you know, he was very against the sort of simple-minded Black nationalist approach that was one of the wings of Black politics. So he would use me and take me to these meetings where I was, you know, the only white person, let alone, you know, the foreigner. And of course, I immediately became, you know, a sort of touchstone of argumentation, which is exactly what Neville wanted. He was like, and, you know, it was a wild moment. And I just soaked all of it. I mean, the chairman of the board of our little college was Desmond Tutu. You know, we got a letter snuck onto Robben Island, and Nelson Mandela said, "I would be honored to be the honorary chair of this thing." This is at a moment when these people were either the great villains, as far as apartheid South Africa was concerned, or godlike to the rest of us. You know, they were the heroes who were kept on this island that you could see, but you couldn't get at, and they couldn't get at us. It was, you know, Mandela's mentor was someone who, you know, Walter Sisulu couldn't have been more generous and kind with me. None of it makes any sense, and it changed my life completely.
But this helps to explain something, because you do come back. You become an American academic. You teach, you get tenure at Columbia. But I've always sensed in you, and we'll get to Amherst College, and then I want to get back to the library, everything you've done there. You come back to Columbia, and I sense in you this deep restlessness, because you write your books, they win awards, but you're always thinking up new programs. You're always thinking of something else to do,
No,
like the early
I
college program.
spent 15 years mostly alone reading and writing, which is not my personality, as I think you know, and must be probably obvious. I loved it. I learned a lot. It was amazing. I got tenure at Columbia. It was ridiculous. I met, I made a family, all of that. I think there was a restlessness, and certainly by 2001, two things happened. One, my dad died. So issues of, what is one's legacy? Do I want to spend the rest of my life as a professor? And then September 11th happened 2 months after, and I thought, oh my God, the world is really needs more help than I can give it as an academic. And so at that point, I was like, okay, I got tenure, I'm good. I could spend the rest of my life here, which is amazing, but I'm not going to be happy doing that. And whether that was the South Africa experience or, my parents had gone to the March on Washington. I didn't know that until my mother died recently. I mean, this was in the family somehow, in the blood, certainly in my blood. I didn't know that I would be as lucky as I would become to work at two amazing legacy institutions that were ready to think about how to do things differently.
Awesome.
Because the needs of people more directly, right?
Is that because in 2003, you go to a storied, private, liberal arts college in Amherst, Massachusetts.
So keep in mind, Kate, I had never been an administrator at all. I'd never been.
Well, that's what I was going to ask. How did you?
Not only did I not go to Amherst, they rejected me when I applied as a student. I don't know if they knew that at the time. And
Amherst rejected you?
Oh yeah, and I thought I'm never going to get this job, but this is going to be really interesting because I'm going to have a chance to have a conversation with, a board of trustees that are running the top-rated college in America. And I'm going to be completely honest because I'm not going to get the job. I'm not playing a game here. I'm not trying to talk about what they want to talk about. I'm going to talk about what I think. They were so ready for it happened to be an amazing board that was, ready to, the chairman of the board was like, we're the #1 college, which means we should take a risk, which is completely opposite to the general trend in higher education, which is if you're in the lead, you sit on the lead, right? I mean, NYU has fought its way to the lead, but very few institutions move in the pecking order. And Amherst was willing to take a risk. And I was willing to be honest about what I thought were their failings. I was not just going to sit there and say, you're the top ranked college, it's all perfect. I was instead, this is way too white and rich a place. And not for political reasons, but that meant it wasn't as interesting educationally as it could be. There wasn't a mix of students that they could have and could afford. In particular, I focused on economic diversity, knowing that because it's America, that would bring more racial diversity as well. And by the time I left, Amherst was minority white American. We tripled low-income enrollment. We'd shamed Harvard, Yale, and Princeton into taking economic issues of background seriously, even though I don't think they did as much as they sort of said they did. And I learned, you can imagine it was all learning for me, right?
Yes, everything. I was at your 2003 inaugural.
You were at the inauguration. I rember.
So can you just show a picture of the young Tony Marx fighting the right kind of.
Oh dear.
No, it was because you said things that would really shock some people. For example, you said, it is the responsibility of students to learn and learn how to change the world. And then you said something very beautiful. And you've just said it in different words, but this is Tony Marx in 2003. As it remains our duty together to serve the community, and thereby to learn further, to work with those less privileged, by serving our core mission of education, we serve beyond it. And is this what you brought to New York Public Library with your passion for the branches in 2011? I can't resist. I can't resist.
No, no,
I
no.
have to show.
Look, again, I've been stupidly lucky because I didn't know that Amherst was ready for what, but they wouldn't have chosen me if they weren't ready. And that,
Exactly.
there was a history there, which I only discovered when I got there. The charter of the college at its founding says to train the indigent. So all I needed to say was, I'm not a radical here. I'm a conservative. Can we come back to where we started? That was just luck. And, there was a lot of that.
Yes,
The,
but it takes someone to see.
and you got to push it and you got to be willing to take some risks and try. And, not everyone was happy and we made it through. And it's a much stronger, better place as a result. And I think everyone acknowledges that. Fast forward to the library. So 8 years.
I want to show, I can't resist it. You have to forgive me. We have to show the iconic picture.
Oh my
there
goodness.
it is.
It is. Patience and fortitude. Yes.
Yes.
Look,
it can go away now, but it
no,
just,
it's fine.
I thought I had to lapse into a cliche.
So I grew up in New York, going to the public schools. I never walked in the main building. I thought it was way too intimidating for fancy folks, not for me. I used the pretty dumpy Central Branch Library across the street, and it stayed dumpy for the next 50 years. One of the things I'm proudest of is $200 million later, it's the Niarchos Library. It's a crown jewel to match this crown jewel across the street, which, I was not comfortable with an institution that was investing in the research library and relatively, therefore, more elite folks, researchers than the folks using the branches in the South Bronx. I was like, no, we gotta do much better in the neighborhoods. Those are so essential. And we have not only fixing them up, as we talked about at the beginning, but we've changed what a branch library means in New York, and the rest of the country has followed, which is we were always space that everyone used, passive space, I'll call it. Hating air conditioning, which in some of these neighborhoods is essential. Great collections, great librarians, computers, because a lot of people don't have access to computers in this day and age, which is shocking. We can talk about. But I said, if we've got the audience, we're the most visited institution in this town, and we've got the real estate, we should do more with it. Let's get proactive. So we have become education centers, not just passive libraries.
You're like the first responders of culture.
I mean, everything from our biggest programs are early literacy story time, but also after school. So a kid who needs help with their homework, they know that they can come to the branch and get that. They'll get college guidance or career guidance from us, job fairs. And then as people move into adulthood, we do English language instruction because we have always been the first place for the immigrant community, for the asylum seeker. This is not new. And computer skills as an essential, work skill. We are the largest providers of all of those programs in New York after the schools in CUNY, those are for their students. And we are free. Nothing we do we charge for. And what's powerful, Kate, you'll find this entertaining. I think my politics are fairly obvious, though I'm not supposed to have any. Here's a moment where I agree with the Chicago economic theory. I never thought I'd say that, which is I don't have an admissions office, so I can't be selective, which is amazing. I love the fact that we serve everyone from the homeless to the Nobel laureate. I can't, if you come to my education programs, I can't force you to come. I have no truancy officers. There's no requirement that you come. And I can't give you a credential because I'm not a formal education institution. And that
you
means
can give me a life.
We have a discipline that formal education doesn't have, which is if we're not offering the things people want, they're not coming. And they are coming by the millions. And that's powerful stuff, right? And there's a whole different set of lessons from being a professor at Columbia or running the most selective liberal arts college in America. So that's powerful. And then I should just say another piece of what we're after, and we are really working at this and we're getting real close. My audacious, because I like being as audacious as I can be, my audacious aspiration for this institution especially for the research library, because again, we are the public research library in the world.
For them.
Right. Right. The Schomburg, amazing library for performing arts, for theater, music, and dance. The Schomburg for African American in Harlem, just amazing collections, amazing colleagues doing amazing.
I've worked there.
But the key, the goal I've said is, let's not hide from the digital world, which is what we were largely doing when I arrived. Yes, we can bemoan how horrible social media is, et cetera, but that's not good enough. We have to figure out how to turn these tools to do good, which they are hugely powerful at, but the market doesn't do it for them. I run a public good. It's a rare thing left in America. And so that's our only goal. So we've said on the digital front, we aspire to ensure that any person on the planet can read any book from our research collection, the whole long tail of it, for free online through their library. It's now possible to do that. Google scanned 45 million books. They were not sufficiently respectful of copyright. The Supreme Court said you can't show them. Took us a decade to convince Google to let us show them. We are respectful of copyright. We believe that authors need to be compensated. We can do both, especially for the long tail of stuff that isn't in print. We can make it available and maybe bring it back to life. That's the kind of innovation that...
It's brilliant, Tony.
It's what history needs at this moment. And we're going to get there. And it's amazing. And I'll just say one other thing about the library. It not only is it the most inclusive educational institution ever, and the most used and most visited, it's also unique in the following way. It's at scale, right? We have more physical visits than all the museums and sporting teams in this town combined. We're in every...
Say that again, Tony.
More physical visits than all the museums and sporting teams in New York combined, because we're in every neighborhood. People come all the time. Everyone comes. So we're at scale, and we can innovate. With all due respect, I don't have a faculty. I have amazing curators, but I don't have a faculty. I have an amazing union as a partner. I don't have a teachers union. Most importantly, I don't have almost any regulation, because no one ever thought libraries would change. That means, versus the public schools that have regulation, that would fill this room. So when we think, okay, now we need to become education centers, we don't need a committee. We don't need anyone's permission. We just need to find the resources and do it, right? The board is totally ready to step up, which is so inspiring. And the donors have stepped up in remarkable, historic ways. We had never raised money for the branches. We now raise hundreds of millions of dollars for the education programs, while continuing to support the essential work of the research library, which is so inspiring. And
you said something
combination of at scale and being able to innovate, America ensures that its major legacy large institutions don't have that combination. However we do it, we manage to make sure that can't happen. And yet I found myself, without realizing it, at an institution that does exactly what I care passionately about and can innovate at scale. And that's amazing stuff. It's just amazing.
It really is. You spoke eloquently in an interview. You said you were committed to, quote, meeting the ever-changing needs of the library's patrons. And I looked at that word patron, and it was the people who use the library.
No, we argued about that one a lot, because people were saying, well, it's users. I was like, no, that sounds like drug users. Or somebody said, how about customers? I'm like, no, we're free. We're a public good, right? We should be proud of that. There aren't many of those left. We believe in privacy, for instance. Nobody left who believes in that. We said, and people said, you can't use patrons because that sounds like a donor. And I'm like, No, you're being too limiting here. We're so grateful for our donors and for their patronage, but it's the patrons of the everyday, of the
He's that kid who
of
walked
New
into the
York.
immigrant
And I want them to feel ownership of their library, which the word patrons does in a way that customer and users just doesn't, right?
Tony, we have just a few minutes.
I apologize. I talk too much, Kate.
You don't know, it's an inspiring vision, and it embodies what I hope to do was to show a radical imagination, radicalized in South Africa during the anti-apartheid, getting rid of apartheid period, and how you take that education as liberation now to the New York Public Library. And there, oh, I'm so sorry we have so little time because there's so many terrific things you've done. But I have a couple of last slides and the last question before we turn to the questions. So two, and you're going to recognize both of these. You really are. It's not quite a cliche of the other one here. So could we please show these two images? Okay. The Great Library of Alexandria, founded about 3rd century BCE, decayed 500 years later. And this massive building, have you been there?
I'm embarrassed to say I was in Egypt finally last year for the first time, and I didn't have it. I really want. I owe it to myself, to the country, to the library. It, by all accounts, an amazing institution in a country that desperately needs more public good institutions, and a world that does. I'll just say, look, I'm not an expert at this. I'm not, trained as a librarian. God knows, but the Library of Alexandria, which I don't think history is like decided exactly what happened at the end.
Right. How did it
Everyone points at somebody else because, interestingly, nobody wants to be blamed for the end of that library, which tells you something. It's a little like, why are people banning books now? Which is, we'll
get to that in just a second.
All right, but the Library of Alexandria tells you both that everyone understands the power of this legacy that we do. And the new Library of Alexandria says, that's not just legacy. This is real time, future, everybody in it together. And that's amazing, right?
Right. So it's past, present, and you have said at the core, the future of public libraries, because that word public is always.
It's so crucial. So crucial.
The future of public libraries is the same as its past, to make trusted information, learning, and opportunity accessible to all.
It hasn't changed. It's just gotten harder because now we have misinformation that everyone's addicted to in horrible ways.
Exactly what I wanted to
and we have a country where inequality is growing, and we're abandoning the notion of opportunities for everyone.
So, what of all the ideas you have in this great, great institution, what I wanted to ask you about diversity before, but another time, because you can answer the question with your academic work is about the uses of inequality and the uses of exclusion to dampen down diversity. So I think of you as having wonderful ideas about diversity, but the idea now, given the period, given what we hear when we turn on the news, what can your great institution do about the virus, the plague? I use that word deliberately. The plague of disinformation. That's my last question.
We when people not in New York happily are banning books, we're the nation's leading library. We stand up and talk about why that is so terrible. We embrace the logic that says when people ban books, they're doing it out of the bad ideas. But one of the things that it tells you is they know the power of books. Otherwise, they wouldn't be bothering to ban them. They're scared that their kids are going to learn about alternative lives and decide to live those different lives. that tells you something that they recognize the power of what it is we're offering. The New York City is the center of the world. Forgive me, I'm a New Yorker, because of the diversity of its population, which goes back to the Dutch, not the British. It goes back to the Dutch and New Amsterdam. And that's, the same was true at Amherst. The more diversity, the more interesting the conversation, the more everyone learns from each other at a moment when we need different ideas, new ideas, and we need to figure out how to live with each other, not kill each other, which is what we seem to be all too ready or able to do. It's all a piece, and New York just happens to be the perfect locale for it because it is the capital of diversity in the world, which is why it's the capital of the world.
One very quick question, because we have a wonderful question for you. Has anyone ever tried to ban a book in one of the branch libraries or the research centers?
No. We did have some folks a year or so ago sort of try to sort of get some books missing, and we just, put a stop to that. But no, it's New York. That's just not going to fly. And we're proud of that. And we need to support our colleagues, our brethren, some of whose lives are being threatened for simply being librarians, trying to offer students books so that they can think about alternative lives and themselves, right?
Well, two great questions for you. I'm going to read them both, and you take them in turn.
Yep.
First, especially now, any words of advice for student activists, especially your fellow New Yorkers on campuses all over the city? And the next, Tony, anonymous, both anonymous attended. Tony, where does your genius go from here? What is your next challenge?
All right, student activists, I'm old now, so I'm going to be careful.
Right.
I think follow your values, don't hide, don't hold back, but be open to learning. We yelled and screamed about South Africa, and I'm proud of that. But the truth is, we knew nothing about the complications of the place. And only years later did I come to learn that. And it makes it more complicated, but it makes it so much more powerful if you can grapple with that. And so just as I hope our universities are, rather than just sort of reject the students who may be rabble rousing, remember that they are our students, right? And they remain our students. The students also have to remember they're students. And that's not to diminish the power of what they do and how important that is and how it can change the world and has done, but also be open to learning as an ongoing process. I have no, let's be honest, genius, that's not fair. I once studied, you remember I was the last student of a guy named Albert O. Hirschman when I was in grad student.
Oh.
He was a goddamn genius. And one of the reasons I left academia was I knew I would never be at that level, no matter what I did. I do, I like people. I care about people. I respect people. I want to serve people. I want to help people advance. I've been lucky to find institutions that agree with that. I'm a known entity, so they've chosen me for that. I have the best job on the planet. And, as I've gotten older, I understand more about other jobs. I'm going to see this one through. There's still work to do, and happily the board and the library would like me to continue to do that. After that, it's going to be hard to imagine me retiring and sort of puttering in the garden. So I will, I will try to think of something, but we'll see. I mean, who knows what the world, let's be honest, we live at a really hard moment, and the kids, are living through moments where they're not sure there's a future for them to invest in. Or they tell me they can't find any mentors because they don't respect anybody in leadership positions because we've screwed it up for them and we've held on to our positions way past when we should. All kinds of troubling stuff. We have to combat that. We have to demonstrate that we can still meet the public's needs, that we can still have public goods that are not self-interested, but are civically interested. And, that's important stuff. And I will die for that if needs be. I hope not to.
I don't want you to die, Tony. I don't think anybody wants you to die, but I want to thank you. Thank you for your wonderful conversation. Thank you for your passion. Thank you for your enthusiasm. Thank you for seeing things differently and working for that.
Okay,
Thank you for being a learner.
Lifelong friend who's helped inspire me to be that because of your amazing.
You flatter me. You flatter me. But anyway, to people who are watching us now and the thousands who will watch this in the archives, the kid who went to the Inwood Branch Library, think of that child, and what Tony thinks of every day is the multitude of the diverse kids throughout New York who go to the libraries, the adults who go to the research centers, and to see the great library as a community center, as an educational center, at a time when we need truth and education. And that is the school in South Africa, Kanya, tells us education will liberate us and be a public good. Tony, thank you so much. It was just wonderful being with you.
Thank you.
Wonderful being with you. Thank you, everybody, for being here. We look forward to our rest of our season. And again, my deep gratitude to Tony for all that he does. I sign those letters to the city government with a certain rage that I have to do it.
Bless you.
Thank you, Tony. Fabulous, fabulous man. Thank you.
Thank you.